Today's topic is about inspecting desktop browsers as well as mobile browsers that are provided in the HeadSpin cloud locally on things like Chrome Inspection and Safari DevTools. So we'll have a few examples of both. So first, I want to introduce myself. My name is David Broker. I'm a senior solutions engineer at HeadSpin. I've been with the company for a few years now, and before joining this company, I was working as a DevOps engineer or senior engineer for a DevOps platform, and before that, I was in the aerospace industry. I've covered a couple different webinars through a wide variety of different topics between our AV box solution and different automation solutions. And so, as I mentioned today, we're focused on browsers as well, mobile as well as desktop browsers, and how to inspect them locally and interact with them from the CLI tool. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to give a brief overview of HeadSpin, the tool itself, the platform itself, as well as how to connect to the remote browsers that are hosted in the HeadSpin platform. And by that, I mean desktop as mobile. A use case for why we'd want to do something like this, and then a demo of a couple of different examples, and then we'll open it to a Q&A. I do want to mention as well that we have a Q&A button, so feel free to intro any sort of questions you have as this proceeds. They'll be answered at the end, but if one comes to your mind during the demo or during the webinar itself, feel free to ping one of those questions in there and we'll make sure we get them answered. So let's start with the HeadSpin overview. So we have a digital experience platform and it has a bunch of different components. So the main component that we're going to be spending a lot of time on today is the global device infrastructure. We deploy in many data centers around the world to give you a real life experience of what that device interaction looks like in the country or area that is located in, so you can get better insights in the actual experience between the device that's available there, the SIM network that's available there, as well as the actual infrastructure surrounding those locations and how it corresponds to that specific area, instead of just testing in perhaps the US based and not getting a good data set for how it interacts in different aspects of the world. We also have test automation. So besides just having these devices geolocated around the world, we have a strong automation suite, primarily backed with Appium, but we can play with a bunch of different tooling. Some of those I'll mention today. And when we have that built in, it creates a lot more seamless experience. And a lot of our platform is API first. So that allows us to interact with CI tools a lot more seamlessly than doing everything manually. Additionally, we have a performance and quality of experience tooling that uses some machine learning and AI models to actually look at the experience of the application or website that is under test and give you insights to actions to actually go ahead and take you from just doing functional performance level testing to actually improving the application in different parts of the data set, including functional level, KPI-driven experiences, and additionally network level information like slowness of responses or CPU or memory usage of the actual application or test. And then lastly, as I kind of mentioned, kind of bleeds from the performance, is you also get insights to actions. So instead of having to thumb through all the data that we provide, we can bubble this up in dashboarding tools to allow you to get a higher view, like a 10,000-foot view of exactly the experience that you're having in your application, so you know exactly where to work on next and improving the lifecycle of your application for a better customer experience. And this is sort of how we do it. So as I mentioned, we have a global device infrastructure. And the way we do this is we have this thing called a P box. There'll also be an image that's going to be associated on a few slides after this, where we can host the devices for mobile, or we also can put the browsers on the P box themselves. And then you can connect to them. And the great thing about this sort of form factor we deploy with is it allows you to put it really wherever. We can deploy on premise in certain locations, or you can leave it to us and we can put in our own data centers. And you could do a hybrid of both approaches as well. And additionally, with the way we interact with devices allows for a lot more of an omni-channel approach. I covered this a little bit in the AV Box webinar. That'd be a great look if you're kind of interested in that omni-channel approach, which will allow us to go from just mobile and desktop to even expanding to like Alexas or TV and streaming devices as well. Here's just a few quick slides about experiences that we've helped improve on different customers of ours. Just kind of keep that up. And then, as I mentioned, here's the image of the P box, and then here's the AV box solution that allows us to do a lot more omni-channel testing in different devices. So we can see a sort of a TV sort of demo in there. And the P box is where we host all those mobile devices and the browsers that allows us, as I mentioned, to really deploy wherever. It's server rackable, so it's super easy to modulate and put where it needs to be. All right, so let's get to the topic at hand, connecting locally to cloud-hosted browsers. So how do we do this? So first of all, we will kind of discuss how to actually do it. So like the CLI commands associated with it, some use cases for why you'd want to do such a thing. And then, as I mentioned, we'll go into the mobile side and kind of cover the same sort of information about use cases and why you'd want to do it. And then we'll see some of those examples live. So the way we'll do this is there's browsers that are allocated in the HeadSpin environment for your testing, and we'll actually use a CLI tool to go ahead and run that connection and then use it as if it's tethered locally, which will allow us to open up the local resources we have like Chrome inspection and DevTools on our local environment to connect to these devices, even though they're hosted in the cloud. So kind of look at the CLI and how that works. And then additionally, some sort of housekeeping about that is how do we want to interact with it? There's a couple different ways. If you're just running a bunch of automation against these, you'll want to do that programmatically. So you can use a CLI tool or an API call for that. But additionally, we can manually get the device in the state that we want before we want to test it. And that's really key for things like the DevTools environment itself. And then we'll look at actually exactly how to view it in DevTools and then how to connect to other frameworks. I believe for this, Puppeteer and Playwright are big two examples in this one. So how to connect it. So here is actually the DevTool command that we'll be using. So it's hsconnect browser. So the HS CLI is a downloadable CLI that's very lightweight and it runs in your terminal. And then you just supply the API token and the browser that you'd want to connect to, and then it appears locally in your infrastructure. And so that's great for these sort of DevTools environments where you already have something loaded up, you're already using the browser, and I just want to inspect this page. So you can go ahead and paste that command. I'll show where to find it, and then you can see it in DevTools like we're going to discuss. But then additionally, if you're doing something in automation, it's not something that you'd want to really have a state. You want to kind of grab it at runtime, and perhaps you'd want to capture the data from that stream. You want to create a performance example like we talked about in the previous slide. So you want to see all the data that comes out of it. And so you can do something by adding that capture flag to actually start capturing the data out of it as well. So you don't just have an ephemeral sort of use case. It actually records that data for your own usage. So here's an example, and I'll show this live as well about, connecting. So you see the HS Connect tool has been ran, and then you sort of see a output in the current command terminal saying, hey, we're connected, and we're on localhost 922. So you can go ahead and connect that to your DevTools protocol and then start inspecting the page. And then you can also see in the Chrome inspection, you see the tabs that you have available to inspect on that specific remote browser. And you can see it's a remote target, and then it kind of describes the target that's connected to, which matches exactly the one that I asked it to connect to. And here's another example of just like running some control finds of elements and making sure that I can find them on the page. So that means I can put them in my Selenium scripts and go ahead and test that actual button and make sure that the button can be pressed. So I can do that all in the DevTools and then run it in my script itself. Additionally, here's a Playwright example. I mentioned, just because we are Appium first on a lot of grounds, it's not a limitation. So you can go ahead and feel free to use Playwright or Puppeteer. This is actually an example from our documentation. So if this is of interest to you, you can go ahead and look at our docs in this example and kind of see how it would fit into your automation framework itself. And as I mentioned, you can enable the capture from the CLI commands. So you don't have to worry about doing that during the script itself and running API calls. You can do it all from the actual command to connect to this to allow you to run this test itself. So now I want to demo those quick examples. So the first one I want to show is just the connection between the DevTools environment. So I'll actually go ahead and I'm going to start using this browser here. So I'm going to start it without capture. Kind of as we mentioned, we're just trying to find some selectors, so we don't really need to record this session for any reason. So as I mentioned, you can go in the HeadSpin platform, find the device that you want to test on and hit the start button. And then we can see this blank screen. And from here, we can go to the URL bar and type in perhaps a website that we want an interest in. This is a great Selenium testing website, so I like this for looking at selectors and things of that nature. So we can paste that URL and then we can see it's brought up on the page. And then what we can do is we can go to this DevTools area, and here's sort of all those CLI commands that we were running or we were looking at in the actual PowerPoint itself. So we can find the one that's most applicable. I'm going to use the first one since it discusses, using the DevTools protocol. I'm going to copy that out. And then I'm going to paste it in my CLI tool. And now we can see that you can open up Chrome Inspect and view it, and it's over localhost 922. So I'm going to go ahead, and I already have Chrome Inspect opened up. We can see it here, but just to make sure, we are talking on that same port and host. So from here, I can go ahead and open up the actual DevTools. Let me go ahead and refresh this. Okay, so now we can see that the actual website is available here, and we can actually use the DevTools just like you would for anything else. You can find the different paths. You can find these different selectors, and then from here you can sort of create your XPaths from what's available here. And additionally, you can use it just like you would any other time. So you can copy the different XPaths, and you sort of can control find them and see, the different content you have. You can interact with the console just like you would on the DevTools in your laptop as well. And obviously, different networking packets you can gather there just like you would any other time you're using DevTools in your other environments. Then the only other thing about this that I want to show is sort of a similar approach, but instead we're going to go ahead and use the capture command. So if we go back to the PowerPoint, we can find, I just need to add this capture all. So I'll go ahead and do that. And I need to make sure I spell capture right. Apologies for that. And then we sort of see the same approach that it's going to print out the same exact information before. It's going to take a little bit longer to start since it's actually initiating that capture session. And then we can see that it's there. And so if we actually open this up now, we can see that the capture flag has this button enabled and it has turned green. So now we know we're capturing everything that's going on here. And from here, I can go ahead and run sort of a playwright example. Oh, my script has been misconfigured. Go ahead and fix that. Apologies for that. Yeah, and so part of this script I have printing out the entire page object. So now we can see the correctly configured script is actually printing out what we need now. And we can see that it's pulled out the playwright documentation, which is the entire point of the test here. So we can see that we can view the test as it goes. I mean, there's not a whole lot to it, but we can at least see that the playwright example is connecting to this browser and that the capture is enabled. And then from here, I'll just go ahead and stop the connection. And that's the example I wanted to show for browsers. So the next aspect is how to do the same thing with mobile devices, right? So the same sort of use case, you still want to test, between Chrome DevTools protocol, or maybe you want to inspect your web views of your actual applications themselves. You can do that with the Appium Inspector, but it's a lot more powerful to use something like Chrome DevTools or Safari for that same example. And so with the same sort of philosophy using the HS Connect tool, it'll be a slightly different command form wise. We can still get all the same capabilities that we can with the browser type as well. And additionally, we can manually lock the device, get it to the state that we want, or we can use an API, or we can use the CLI tool to do the same sort of approach as we just did with the browser. And I just want to kind of walk through how to do the same thing with the mobile devices in both Chrome DevTools as well as Safari. So this is what it looks like. So very similar approach. You can see that the page is loaded in the HeadSpin platform, but then you can also see the mimic of the page in my Chrome DevTools environment. And you can see I'm looking at selectors, sort of highlighting different elements in the page. But as I mentioned with the browsers, you still have the full access of the DevTools suite there as well. And then this is actually a web view. So kind of the same thing where you can actually see the full HTML of the web view and inspect it and look at different selectors in the web view instead of just relying on the different inspectors like Appium. This is a lot cleaner of an approach to do something like DevTools for the same sort of scenario. I don't have pictures for both in Safari. I just actually grabbed the picture for the website, but the same approach is still valid for iOS devices. So if you did have a web view that you'd want to inspect, using Safari will also allow you to do that as well. So we can just see this is actually the Safari DevTools instead of the Chrome DevTools, and this is an iOS device as indicated here. So I'll show both live as well, so you kind of get a feel of what that looks like. So if I go back in the HeadSpin platform and I look for an Android device, I'll go ahead and grab the Samsung. And then same thing here, except for, it's just one command instead of DevTools had a couple different commands, just depending on the application or the use case. This just has one solid command. And if you run this, similar before, we'll get an output that just says, hey, the device is connected. And the nice thing with Android is we can also see this in ADB devices, which allows a lot more that's not necessarily in the scope of this webinar. Like you can open this up in Android Studio now, and same thing with when we do iOS, you'll be able to see that in Xcode. But it's out of scope, so I don't want to focus too much on that. But now we see that this device is connected locally. Let me go ahead and open up a web page here. I'll just open up the same internet web page. And so now we see that it is laid out in a mobile friendly manner. So if I go back to my inspection here, we can see there's a few all the different tabs are open, like cute puppies and the internet. So then if we go ahead and hit the inspection tool here, we'll bring up the DevTools protocol. And we can see that you can look at the HTML from the DevTools, as well as see this little image of what is displayed on the screen. And then just like before, we can sort of click on these different selectors and get the paths out of them as well, just like before. And if we do make a change on this side, it will take effect in both. So you can see I just changed into a login screen. And so now we can see that changing both screens. And so you don't have to worry about like reloading as much. Obviously, this is a weird use case because I opened this login page. But yeah, the same thing is applicable here. Is as this left screen changes, the right screen will change to keep up with it as well. And then just use this command to disconnect from that, but you could also just close the experience. And then just to show the same thing in iOS, grab this XR down here, wake it up, and I'll just open Safari. And the actual remote debug is just in the overview, unlike the tools in Android. So you go ahead and copy the same sort of CLI command, paste it here. And now the only difference is we've been working on Safari, and now we need to work out of, or we've been working out of DevTools, now we've got to work out Safari. So let me open up the Safari instance. And then if there's a develop page, it may be not enabled for some users, like as they first download Safari, but it's something you can change in the settings. After you enable that develop page, you should be able to see the iPhone that's connected locally, and you can go ahead and open up the inspector. And then similar to the Chrome DevTools, you can go ahead and find the full path here and look at the different elements here as well. So if you want to look at, the book demo button, you can go find that as well. So that's what I wanted to cover in the demo, and just kind of make everyone aware of how this can be used. Go ahead and go back to the PowerPoint here. So I just, as I mentioned, ability to how do you use DevTools with the browsers and the mobile devices, what sort of features and functionalities are there? Additionally, how do you do that? So it seems like it's pretty straightforward. You just use that CLI tool, and then you can go ahead and interact with the devices as needed or as desired. Also, I wanted to show that we can interact with different automation frameworks like Puppeteer and Playwright. And then, as I mentioned, it's not just on mobile, it's not just on desktop browser, but it is on both. And it gives you a lot more gamut to test the different parts of apps or websites that are needed. And that's why I wanted to mention, for web views, it's very a lot easier to use things like DevTools than something like the inspector for that sort of scenario. So now I want to open up to Q&A. I know this is a brief one today, so I'll pause for a little bit on the Q&A. I see we have a few questions here, so I'll go ahead and start with those. If there's anything else that comes to mind, feel free to write them in. So the first question I can see here is can you use HS Connect programmatically in a script? And yeah, the answer to that is you can. So any sort of scripting language that can leverage the CLI tool, like I know most can, but like for example, Python with subprocesses, you can do that and have that command programmatically. Obviously, the only thing you'll need to keep an eye on is opening and closing that. So that's one aspect that you'd want to make sure that you manage properly. So the connection should be seamless, and then you'll want to make sure you close it after you're done, so it doesn't hang or like leave out there without anything being discussed to it, any sort of protocol open to it. And then with that being said, the other important aspect of that is, you're going to probably connect to a bunch of different browsers as you do that testing. So you want to make sure that you have a way to programmatically load the different browsers you want to connect to. I would use something like the device API to sort of figure out what devices you have access to, and then from there feed the script the devices that you want to test on. I think something similar to that is actually the next question, which is, as you kind of saw in the DevTools environment, I was using localhost 9222. So obviously, if there's already something communicating on that port, and you have another device trying to connect on the same port, there could be issues. So we actually do have a flag within that CLI tool to change the port that it's communicating to. And in DevTools, you can open up different ports, so you can have a wide variety of ports and devices talking to the same DevTools instance, as I mentioned, through those different port numbers. So that's, as I mentioned, that's a flag, and you can also put that as part of your programmatic script, is to sort of change the ports as you spin up new nodes to connect to. And then I also saw another question, which what other use cases can be accomplished by using the HS Connect CLI tool? So, I mentioned during the webinar that you can open things up in Xcode and Android Studio. So that's sort of, not exactly on topic, but what you can do on something like that is, if you have it in Xcode or Android Studio, you can run espresso tests, you can run XUI tests on these devices. You can open up a debug instance and debug the application on a real phone, which could gain more insights than doing it on some sort of simulator or emulator, since it's actually a real world device and there's going to be different data points, different interactions with it on a real phone than perhaps a emulator. And perhaps you are having an issue in prod that couldn't be found on an emulator. And so you can put up debug points in your application and see that live on the device itself. Instead of trying to debug, through different testing mechanisms, you can actually just throw it in Xcode or Android Studio and see exactly what's happening there. I don't see any other questions right now. I'll pause for a few minutes and see if anything else trickles in. So I'm not seeing anything else. If anything comes in, I'll make sure to answer it before we close here. But I do want to say thank you for attending. Hopefully you learned something today. And if not, if there's any questions that you have or anything that sparked your interest from this webinar, feel free to email me at dbroker@headspin.io. And we'll make sure to set up a meeting. We can discuss whatever you have interest in the platform. Thanks for your time.